The violence is really incredible in South Sudan. Both in South Sudan and in CAR, in the Central African Republic next door, a lot of this violence is being committed with very kind of low-level weapons. Hi, I'm Sam Oakford, Vice News' UN and Diplomatic Correspondent. I'm here today to take some of your questions on the line. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey Sam, thanks for coming on the show today. As you know, we've got a bunch of people who are on Skype and they're all excited to talk to you. Let's start out with Angie, who's calling us, I believe, from San Francisco. Did I get that right, Angie?
Yep, you're right.
Hi, Angie.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me. I think you're in such an interesting position because you're on Vice, and that's a platform primarily targeted to us millennials. And you're reporting on the UN, and that's an intergovernmental institution, decades worth of legacy. So in your experience, what is the overall attitude and opinion of our generation towards a lot of UN's role in achieving international cooperation? Do you think we're more skeptical, more idealistic? Just what are your thoughts?
Great, thanks for that question. I think it's an important question. On one level, due to the internet, due to different forms of communication, I think a lot of young people are better informed about what the UN is even doing. The UN is all over the world. It's helping children, but it's also in a position where it has to probably do that job a bit better and make sure people can interact on directly with folks in the field. One thing I've noticed in New York is that the internship program here, it generally includes folks from like Europe, from maybe East Asian countries that are a little bit better off. They're not actually from the places where the UN is helping people the most. So I think that's one thing that could be fixed. And generally, if there's kind of better availability for folks, so that kids can interact with the UN, that would be good.
Mm-hmm. And I think that just in general, a lot of so I crowdsourced this question on Facebook and just wanted to know what my friends wanted to know about the UN. And a lot of it really came down to expression of sort of disappointment a little bit, or just wanting to understand whether the UN is going to make a dent in certain areas, like, removing Assad, to human trafficking, which is initiatives that, have been going on for decades. What do you think the UN is in terms of their perception to our generation? What are they doing in that front to remediate these concerns?
Well, I think on one level, the concerns of children are pretty much, or young people, millennials, I guess, are now more than ever the same as kind of everyone else. So as you mentioned, millennials are worried about what's going on in Syria. They're worried about what's going on in South Sudan. So in that sense, young people are in a unique position because they're already online. They're already on the internet. They can reach out to folks. They can talk to the UN directly. They can tweet at them. They can, you can send an email to the UN. So I think the UN probably could do a better job of listening to those voices, because in a lot of cases, children are the ones, and millennials are the ones that are in a position to change things in the coming years. So, so that's what's up. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right, thank you, Angie. Sam, let's say to Anna, who's calling us from Herzliya, which is just outside of Tel Aviv.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming on.
My question has to do with Palestine joining the International Criminal Court this year. Mm-hmm. I've kind of noticed that there's a common perception that the ICC maybe isn't a highly effective institution. I think this really came to light last month when South Africa flouted the court's arrest warrant against Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. So I was just wondering if you think an ICC investigation into Gaza crimes committed in Gaza during the conflict last summer would be an opportunity for the court to restore its credibility.
Thanks. That's a very good question, a very timely question, given, as you mentioned, what happened last month in South Africa. There obviously are a lot of questions about the ICC's viability, whether it can enforce arrest warrants and so forth. As for the investigation in Gaza, that definitely is new territory for the court. Not only in the past, the court has only gone after African individuals, so that's all the cases that have already exist. Obviously, this is a preliminary inquiry, so you can't really pronounce so much on what's going to happen. But there is a case there. The UN released a report last month that basically indicted both sides in the Gaza conflict for possible war crimes. So in that sense, it's an opportunity for the International Criminal Court to kind of, merely for more people to pay attention to it. But you also have to be careful, I think, and not invest too much in this one case in terms of turning around the ICC, getting people to pay attention to it. There's a lot of other issues that predate this. The U.S., for instance, is not even part of the ICC. And when you talk to folks at the UN, folks from Africa, folks from other parts of the developing world, that's kind of the first thing they say. They say, well, this is a world body that's supposed to enforce, judgments and so forth, but some of the main countries on the Security Council aren't even part of it.
I'm glad you brought up the UN report on Gaza that just came out, because I was wondering if you had any insight into whether the evidence against Hamas for also being engaged in war crimes during the conflict would actually damage the same cause that the Palestinians are trying to advance by joining the ICC.
Well, that's something I've talked to with Palestinian officials, and they're aware of what happens when you give the ICC jurisdiction, in this case in Palestine, so dating back to last summer. And obviously, given the report that came out last week, there are allegations that both sides have committed war crimes. I think that's a chance that they're willing to take, just to put myself in their shoes for a moment. I think that they balance the kind of the outcomes there, and even if the ICC eventually indicts a Palestinian, indicts an Israeli, I think they think that's worth it. One thing that you see at the UN is the kind of malaise about Palestine, where the Security Council earlier this year, there was talk about a resolution that might set a time frame for withdrawal on the 1967 border. From my understanding from talking to diplomats, that's really not going to happen anytime soon. Not to mention the peace talks themselves, which for many years were the focus of attention. Those seem to be pretty much dead at the moment. So the ICC is a unique opportunity, I think, for the Palestinians. At least that's how they view it, in light of kind of nothing else really happening.
So given the aforementioned kind of lack of muscle of the ICC, do you think if they do reach some kind of verdict after launching an investigation, if they decide to do so, will that actually change anything on the ground?
Well, that's a good question, and any kind of indictment, let alone an investigation, so I guess I just should preface that, there's a preliminary inquiry right now. There could possibly be an investigation, an official investigation, and then there could possibly be, indictments and so forth. Should the ICC years down the line, which is my understanding, it might be the time frame, indicts an Israeli, someone in the military or someone in Hamas, whether they can enforce that remains to be seen. So I think kind of the optics at this point are more important maybe than what the eventual indictment is, or what, if someone goes to The Hague, which seems probably pretty unlikely given the way Israel and Hamas have kind of interacted with international organs such as the ICC.
Okay, great, that's really interesting, thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Calling all the way from Israel. So, Sam, guess what? We've got another Skype caller. This time it's Shanda, who is calling us from sunny San Francisco. It's sunny there, right, Shanda?
I'm actually in New York, and it is sunny, though.
Hey, Shanda.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks. So I've been reading a lot of your work, especially on South Sudan, which has been great and very enlightening. And currently in my internship at Control Arms, I've been personally following the South Sudan conflict very closely, and we see that the UN Security Council has sanctions placed and just indicted 6 people on those sanctions, but only for travel and assets. So what do you think the next step should be for the Security Council? Do you think an arms embargo would be a good next step? And do you think that actually have an impact on South Sudan on the ground?
That's a very good question. As you mentioned, an arms embargo has kind of been the other thing that's floated at the Council. My sense is that might be, again, a bit of a ways off. As you know, the sanctions mechanism for South Sudan was only implemented in March, so it's taken a few months for them to even come up with these names. Things on South Sudan, unfortunately, seem to go pretty slowly at the Security Council. I mean, there's probably many reasons for that. There are a number of crises in the world, but I think that probably a lot of folks, I think maybe in your field too, think they should be working a little bit quicker in addressing those things. But as you mentioned, an arms embargo might be a good next step. That's how some people see it. Also, the African Union has a commission of inquiry in South Sudan, and that's another thing to look out for. They've kind of they said they finished it, but they don't want to release it until peace talks kind of achieve something. And based on what's happened in the past few weeks, it really doesn't seem like that those are going anywhere. And some of the atrocities are really, really disturbing. So there's an argument to be made for releasing that. I know a lot of human rights groups, in fact, have pushed for that to happen.
Yeah. Just following up on that, I know that you work very closely at the UN and behind the scenes a little bit on treaty negotiations, and I've been kind of aware with the Arms Trade Treaty. And just moving forward, how do you think treaties and negotiations behind the scenes can hopefully affect long-term situations?
Well, I think South Sudan is a perfect example for that, where a treaty such as the the ATT could be helpful tracking weapons, and both in South Sudan and in CAR, in the Central African Republic next door, a lot of this violence is being committed with very kind of low-level weapons, and a treaty such as that would be helpful in tracking that. As for behind the scenes, I think that it's important for folks to kind of bring these kinds of, I would say simmering conflict, but the violence is really incredible in South Sudan, so I don't think simmering is the right word, but these long-standing conflicts, if they're brought to the attention, I think that could add a little impetus to treaty negotiations, bring it to their attention, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, one more thing. Once again, I think we are all pretty clear and aware that South Sudan is very underreported and very lacking media attention. And I see that you actually really report on it quite frequently. So I wanted to know, why do you report on it, and why do you think that it's so underreported in general?
So, well, those are two really good questions. I report on it because I think that, well, my editors want me to report on it too, I should mention. But at the security, it's a conflict where it seems more accessible in some way for the Security Council. You look at the situation in Syria, people don't quite know what to do. There's actors on the council that have taken one side or the other, and there's a real logjam in terms of any sort of action, to say nothing of the level of violence there. And on South Sudan, as in the Central African Republic, that seems like an environment where the UN could do have a greater effect. And the Security Council, if they take action on an arms embargo, for instance, that would have probably have a much more impactful effect than if you did something similar in Syria, if that were an option.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, since there is precedent, and since the EU has an arms embargo to South Sudan, and so is America, so there's precedent to possibly do an embargo internationally as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm sorry I said San Francisco instead of New York. Obviously, you're in New York. All right. Well, hey, Sam, we actually just got this tweet a second from one of our viewers named Melker, who wants to know if the UN has learned anything from what happened in Rwanda during the 90s. Do you think any lessons from Rwanda can be applied to South Sudan?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's really a black mark on the UN over 20 years ago now. They now have new kind of doctrines, responsibility to protect. You have to act when you see something like this happen, or signs that something, atrocities may be committed, even if they're not on the level of the genocide in Rwanda. So I think on one level the UN has learned that. Peacekeepers are also in positions that they haven't been in the past, and they're able to protect more people. At the same time, there's questions about whether they should be doing more, particularly in South Sudan, where they're basically overwhelmed protecting, I think it's now over 140,000 South Sudanese who are seeking shelter with them, and they're basically unable to leave and go do anything else. The UN has learned. I think they probably, most people would say they could learn even more.
Well, we can all learn more. And speaking of learning more, let's see if our next caller, Miguel, can get you to learn a little bit with his questions. So let's say hi to Miguel.
All right.
Hello, Sam. Thank you for taking my questions. First of all, I just wanted to ask whether you think there's a root cause to Puerto Rico's current debt crisis, or do you think it's just a series of causes and that just rose, give rise to the crisis.
Thanks, Miguel. So I went down to Puerto Rico in February to report on basically the same issues that we're talking about now this week after what the governor announced, that they couldn't repay their debt. It seems like there's a lot of reasons why Puerto Rico's in the situation it is. I'm sure you may know them better than even I do. for many years, the economy was doing quite well. It had kind of tax breaks. It had a competitive advantage over some other countries. Manufacturing left, those tax breaks left. I think probably, as you're aware, if you read the Puerto Rican press, you see also a high level of corruption where money is kind of divvied up. There's consultancies that they don't seem to add up, people getting money and other things. The government also, in the report that was released Monday that was commissioned by Governor Garcia Padilla, it mentioned that the government pretty regularly would just take out loans to cover deficits. They also kind of didn't have the capacity to get taxes. They would make tax amnesties, and that set a bad precedent. And obviously I haven't even mentioned the kind of political dynamic in Puerto Rico, where it's still unresolved and it's not clear what's going to happen right now. Puerto Rico can't file for bankruptcy, which municipalities can do in the rest of the country. So that's my sense, but.
Yeah, and it's important you mentioned the political dynamic, because I think, part of the reason, and maybe they've told you something different, is that this, taking of bond corruption that's been going on, it's basically mostly been due to the political structure. The fact that, different from the states, our political parties do not base themselves on economic policy. There's not like a liberal party and a conservative party. So I think that's, taken away from the actual governing. And I wanted to get your take on whether you think it's important for all countries, especially in Puerto Rico, to have parties which base their positions on economic policy instead of, status or any other, legal problems which short-term do not resolve the issues that face every country. So basically, my question was, that whether you think that's a main issue. That would be a main issue. The fact that the main parties that govern us, do not give utmost importance to the economic issues.
Thanks. That's a good question. I think when I went down to Puerto Rico, that dynamic was clear to me, that the kind of economic issues weren't as clear as the kind of just basically party affiliations. Obviously, it's not necessarily unique to Puerto Rico. The rest of the U.S., I think a lot of people, vote on the line. But that sense of kind of parties kind of coming back and forth, one party in power, one party the next time is in power. No one really wants to kind of ruffle feathers, kind of end the business as usual. Some of the kind of social welfare programs maybe could have been run a little bit better. Not to say that they should be cut or anything, but I think no one really wanted to do that. And there's a lot of vested interest. The business community and the political class seem to be, kind of switching chairs sometimes. But again, same thing in the rest of the U.S. But as you mentioned, I think the political status, how that's unresolved, I think that is a huge element here. No one really kind of can step forward on those platforms that might be viable in the rest of the country, because people don't quite know what Puerto Rico is still. That's my sense when I was talking to people. The independence, statehood, there's a number of questions that are unresolved.
Yeah. Thank you for taking my question, Sam. And that was a great article, by the way, you wrote on Puerto Rico.
Thanks, Miguel.
All right, Sam. So we're almost at the end of the show now, but we actually did get a couple more tweets about Puerto Rico. And
great.
I want you to take a look at one of them.
Okay.
Do you think the federal government, the U.S. federal government, should bail out Puerto Rico? And why did thousands of Puerto Ricans leave the island for the U.S.? I know you wrote a little bit about this. So what are your thoughts?
Well, a bailout, I guess there's two issues here right now. There's you could literally bail out Puerto Rico. You could pay its debt. I think in Washington that's really not being floated. I think that would run into a lot of opposition. I don't really know what should be done, but the other option is Chapter 9 bankruptcy, which would allow a kind of orderly process that would, creditors would be at the same table with the government. And there's a bill in Congress now that would allow Puerto Rico to do that. It remains to be seen what kind of support that will get. Some folks, some congressmen and women are against that. They would prefer a financial control board, which would give more protection to the kind of less power to the local government. I think Chapter 9 is what you should look out for in the future, and see how those bills go in Congress. As for why thousands of, really hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans leave the island for the U.S., for the states, basically there's a ton of reasons. Unemployment is very high. Only 40% of the population is kind of in the workforce. A lot of folks have just kind of given up on jobs. When I went down to Puerto Rico, I interviewed a lot of young people, and one thing I should mention is, especially in San Juan, you run into a lot of really highly educated folks, people that have high-level degrees, and they just kind of don't know what to do there. They end up working in kind of minimum wage jobs, and they don't see a way out. So if I was in that position, I might leave too. There's a number of reasons, but the economy is definitely the first one.
All right. Well, like I told some of our guests before the show, we could talk about each of these issues for at least 30 minutes. But we don't have 30 minutes. So, Sam, we're at the end of the show. Why don't you say goodbye to everybody at home?
Thanks for coming on. Goodbye, and tune in next week.
The United Nations reported that the entire western part of the country has been cleansed of Muslims and is now debating deploying a peacekeeping operation. The time we spent in the Central African Republic really was a major turning point in the conflict. When the French troops came in to put a stop to the Seleka's reign of terror, it was a welcome sight for many. But everyone underestimated the anti-Balaka. And despite them promising that they would drop their weapons after the Seleka left, they proved to be just as destructive. The UN sending peacekeepers would be a step in the right direction, but it could be a long time before Muslims are safe again in Bangui. And an even longer time before those who are forced to leave can come back.